Alex had always thought he and Emma were the perfect couple. Their relationship had started off with a kind of excitement and passion that seemed destined to last. But recently, things had changed. The intimacy they once shared had faded, replaced by a slow, creeping distance that neither of them was acknowledging. Emma's work had become more demanding, and her late nights had become routine. Alex, on the other hand, had just moved to a new city for a job promotion, which kept him occupied during the day, but at night, he found himself alone. Alone in a relationship that no longer felt like it was the one he'd signed up for. Despite the growing sense of isolation, Alex had convinced himself that Emma was just going through a phase. She was tired, stressed, and maybe needed time to adjust. He loved her, and he wasn't ready to give up on them. But every day, something seemed off. Her conversations were shorter, her smile less frequent. There was an absence in their interactions that Alex couldn't ignore, even if he tried to convince himself it was nothing. It was during this period of quiet tension that he hired Sophia. She was a quiet, professional house cleaner, a recommendation from a friend. Alex figured it was just a practical decision. He and Emma were both working too much to keep up with the house. Sophia came twice a week, did the cleaning quickly and efficiently, and left without much fanfare. At first, Alex didn't pay much attention to her. She was just a worker, someone who came and went without making any waves. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice little things. Sophia would always arrive exactly on time, and when she was there, she was quiet yet somehow comforting. She would smile politely and ask how he was, listening intently when he spoke. It wasn't much, just simple conversation, but for Alex, it was enough. He realized that, in the absence of Emma's warmth, Sophia's small gestures were filling a void he hadn't realized was there. Alex never thought much of it at first. She was just doing her job, after all. But as the days went by, he found himself looking forward to her visits. They'd exchange pleasantries, talk about their days, and sometimes, Sophia would linger just a little longer, tidying up extra corners or offering a quick remark about something around the house. It wasn't anything special, but it was something. It was a distraction from the growing rift between him and Emma, and at the very least, it made him feel seen. Emma, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever. It wasn't that she was actively avoiding Alex, she was just not there. She came home late, too tired to engage in meaningful conversation. She often had excuses for not spending time together, and when they did talk, it was mostly about the logistics of their schedules. Alex tried not to take it personally, but the nagging feeling that something was off lingered. Was it the stress of her job? Or was it something else? He didn't know, but it was becoming harder to ignore. Sophia was still just a cleaner, but her presence in the house started to feel more familiar, even comforting. She would often ask about Alex's day, listening with a kindness that made him feel less alone. She didn't bombard him with advice or try to fix things, like some people did. Instead, she just listened, as though she genuinely cared about how he was feeling. In a way, it was a relief. No one else seemed to take the time to notice him anymore, at least not in the way Sophia did. Over time, their conversations became more personal. Sophia asked about his childhood, about his hopes and dreams. She spoke of her own life, how she had moved to the city to escape a difficult past, how she worked to pay her bills and keep her life in order. Alex found himself drawn to her honesty, the way she didn't try to impress him, but simply shared herself. She wasn't looking for anything from him, and maybe that was what made it so easy to talk to her. Alex never planned for it to happen, but he began confiding in Sophia in ways he hadn't with anyone else in months. He'd tell her about his frustrations with Emma, about how he felt like their relationship was slowly slipping away. Sophia listened, never judgmental, always patient. She never offered any quick fixes, but her understanding felt like a balm to his wounded soul. He began to realize how much he looked forward to seeing her. Not just for the cleaning, but for the moments of connection they shared, no matter how brief. It was strange. He had never expected to form any kind of emotional bond with a house cleaner. But the more time he spent with Sophia, the more he began to question why he felt so disconnected from Emma. Emma's absences became more frequent. She was away for longer hours, often coming home too late to even have a proper conversation. Alex couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something missing, something unspoken between them. He wondered if she was seeing someone else, but he tried to push the thought out of his mind. Instead, he turned to Sophia for comfort. She wasn't the problem. She was a reminder of what he had lost, the closeness, the emotional connection, the feeling of being cared for. One day, as Sophia was finishing up in the kitchen, Alex caught himself watching her. She was absorbed in her work, but there was something about the way she moved, her gentle grace, the way her eyes would flicker up to meet his when she spoke. It was more than just a physical attraction. He was drawn to her presence, to the way she made him feel understood. It felt safe with her. And that scared him. He shook the thought away quickly. Sophia was just a cleaner, after all. He had Emma, the woman he loved. But deep down, the loneliness he had been pushing aside began to stir again. It was a quiet, uncomfortable feeling, one that he couldn't quite silence, no matter how hard he tried. Something was changing inside him, something he couldn't ignore for much longer. The days continued to blend into each other, with Alex growing more and more unsettled. Emma's absence was becoming a familiar ache, and despite his attempts to keep the peace, the emotional gap between them was undeniable. It wasn't just the long hours or the distracted conversations. There was a coldness that had begun to creep in, and Alex could feel it in every moment they spent together. The silence that stretched between them at night was more telling than anything they said to each other. Sophia, however, continued to be a bright spot in his increasingly lonely days. She was always professional, never overstepping, but there was a tenderness in her gestures that Alex couldn't ignore. Each time she visited, she was the picture of efficiency, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet understanding, that drew him in. She would smile when he entered the room, and they'd exchange a few words, simple at first. But with each passing week, those conversations began to feel more significant. She was, in a way, the only person who seemed to notice him, really notice him. Alex found himself anticipating her visits more and more, not just because of the cleaning, but because of the small moments they shared. It started with the way she listened when he spoke, the way she would ask about his day with genuine interest. He realized that when she asked, she wasn't just making polite conversation. She cared, or at least, that's how it felt. Emma's disconnection was growing more apparent every day, and Sophia's simple presence was a balm for his fractured spirit. They'd talk about everything, his job, her life, the strange feeling. One evening, as the house settled into an eerie quiet, Emma was again absent. She had texted that she'd be working late, a message Alex had grown all too familiar with. He tried to distract himself, watching TV, scrolling through his phone, but the sense of something missing loomed large. The emptiness in the house was palpable, and no matter how much he tried to ignore it, the weight of it was suffocating. He glanced at the clock. Another hour passed, and Emma still hadn't returned. He felt the pull of loneliness gnawing at him again. It was during this quiet that Sophia arrived to clean the house. She greeted him, as always, with a soft smile and a few words. She'd been there so many times, but tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the weight of the silence between Alex and Emma, or maybe it was the constant tension he'd been feeling in his own life, but he found himself lingering in the kitchen, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to change. Sophia, who had always been professional, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. She didn't immediately begin her work as she normally did, but instead paused, looking at him as if she was waiting for him to speak. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice tentative but gentle. Alex hesitated for a moment before answering, his frustration with Emma spilling out before he could stop himself. "I don't know," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It feels like we're drifting apart, and I'm not sure what to do anymore. She's always working, always somewhere else, and I feel like I'm just here, stuck alone." Sophia didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded, her expression softening with understanding. "I'm sorry you're feeling like this," she said quietly. There was something in her voice, a sincerity that made him want to confide in her even more. It's not easy when the person you care about seems so far away, even when they're right next to you. Alex looked at her, surprised by the depth of the connection he felt in that moment. It was a simple statement, but it struck him in a way that words from anyone else wouldn't have. He realized how much he needed to hear that kind of understanding. Without thinking, Alex reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Sophia didn't pull back. Instead, she met his gaze with a quiet calmness. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. But something shifted between them, and before he could stop himself, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a long, passionate kiss, but it was enough. It was a release, a momentary lapse in judgment that came from the weight of emotions Alex had been carrying for far too long. For a split second, he didn't think about Emma or the consequences. He just felt something real, something he hadn't felt in months. When he pulled back, panic washed over him. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. The guilt hit him almost immediately, but Sophia's reaction wasn't what he expected. She didn't recoil or accuse him. Instead, she looked at him with a mix of surprise and understanding. She didn't say anything at first, but the air between them felt charged, almost electric. Alex stepped back, his breath coming in short bursts. He couldn't believe what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he muttered, unable to look her in the eye. "I don't know what I was thinking." Sophia remained silent for a moment before speaking softly, her voice steady. "It's okay, Alex," she said. "You're going through a lot right now. I understand. But you need to think about what this means, what it could do to everything." Her words cut through his guilt, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he realized the weight of what he'd just done. He had just betrayed Emma, the woman he had loved for so long, the woman he had tried so hard to hold on to, even as their relationship crumbled. The thought hit him like a punch in the stomach. He had crossed a line, and now everything was different. There was no going back. The reality of the situation was too heavy to ignore. Sophia's calm demeanor only intensified his own panic. She wasn't judgmental, but Alex couldn't escape the fact that what had just happened was a betrayal of trust, of love, and of everything he had built with Emma. And yet, as much as he tried to fight it, there was a part of him that couldn't deny the pull he felt towards Sophia. The way she had listened to him, the way she had made him feel understood when no one else had. It had created a bond between them that couldn't be erased. "I need to go," he said abruptly, his voice tight. He turned away, his mind racing. Sophia didn't try to stop him, but he could feel her gaze on him as he hurried out of the room. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating, but beneath it, there was something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge, something that scared him. He had just taken a step he couldn't undo, and it felt like everything he had built with Emma had shattered in that single, impulsive moment. Alex spent the next hour pacing the apartment, trying to process what had just happened. His thoughts were jumbled, and the only thing he could focus on was the deep, sinking feeling in his chest. He had betrayed Emma. He had crossed a line with Sophia. And yet, as much as he wanted to feel nothing but regret, there was something inside him that still longed for the connection he had found with Sophia. He didn't know what it meant, or where it would lead, but the guilt was already overwhelming. Just as he was about to sit down, the door opened. Emma walked in, looking exhausted but still carrying the weight of the day. She barely glanced at him as she passed, but Alex felt the sting of her indifference. He had just kissed someone else.